Usually, when we talk about a cultural import, there's this expectation of replication, like a franchise.
Right.
You bring a fast food chain from America to another country, and you basically expect the burger to taste identical.
Oh, yeah. You want a completely standardized experience. You introduce the exact same variables and you demand the exact same product at the end of the line.
Exactly. But if you actually look at music history specifically, look at what happened when American dance music crossed the Atlantic in the late 1980s.
Yeah.
That whole franchise model just completely breaks down.
It shatters, honestly.
It really does. So today we're pulling from this incredibly comprehensive MMR column. It's titled 808 State, The Future of Techno Expanded from Manchester to the World.
And our mission for you on this deep dive is to explore how a group of musicians in a post-industrial English city didn't just, copy an American import.
Yeah, they just clone it.
Right. They mutated it into this massive global intellectual movement. And honestly, this is your shortcut to understanding the very DNA of modern electronic music. I mean, you really cannot grasp where electronic music is today without dissecting this specific moment in time. We were basically looking at a masterclass in cultural alchemy here.
Yeah, alchemy is the perfect word for it. Let's paint the picture for a second. It is the late 1980s. We are in Manchester, England. And on the surface, this is a city that is rapidly losing its industrial momentum.
Yeah, the factories are shuttering.
Exactly. The whole economic engine of the city is just sputtering out. But underground, it is just boiling over with this chaotic cultural energy. You have the iconic club, the Haçienda, which is being run by Factory Records.
Oh, legendary spot.
Truly. And they are curating this totally unique, almost lawless festive space. So you got this brand new, totally futuristic dance music coming in from New York, Chicago, and Detroit.
And it is just violently colliding with local street sense, art school aesthetics, and obviously the emerging drug culture of the time.
Yeah, the atmosphere must have been insane.
Well, just consider the physical space providing the backdrop for all this. You have the sheer decay of the old industrial world, these cavernous, abandoned warehouses, and suddenly they are just being flooded with this relentless mechanical rhythm from the States.
Right.
Particularly something called acid house, which was absolutely blowing up at the time.
And for anyone listening who hasn't actually been to a proper rave, acid house isn't about guitars or traditional singing or anything like that.
No, not at all.
It's defined by these hypnotic, squelchy, almost liquid-sounding synthesizer bass lines that feel like they are aggressively boring into your brain. I mean, it was literally designed to be overwhelming.
It was an all-out assault on the senses.
No.
And Manchester's youth were just completely obsessed with it.
Which is wild, but it makes me wonder, wait, if the hottest music was coming straight out of Chicago and Detroit, why didn't these Manchester kids just mimic that exact sound? Why fix what isn't broken?
Right. Why change a winning formula?
Yeah. I mean, it's like getting a recipe from a top chef in another country, but you only have local ingredients, so you accidentally invent a whole new dish.
What's fascinating here is that it wasn't necessarily a conscious decision to reject the American sound. It was rather a profound act of translation dictated by their limitations.
Oh, limitations.
Yeah. 808 State, who, by the way, formed around 1987 in this super vibrant community surrounding a local shop called Eastern Bloc Records, they couldn't replicate American acid house even if they wanted to. They translated it into a UK sensibility purely out of necessity.
So you didn't have a choice.
Exactly. Your analogy about local ingredients is the absolute key to this whole story. For 808 State, their ingredients were literally whatever discarded gear they could get their hands on.
Because, booking a professional recording studio in the late 80s was absurdly expensive, right?
Oh, completely out of reach. You needed major label backing, which a bunch of kids just hanging around a local record shop definitely did not have.
Right, they're not exactly rolling in cash.
Exactly. They were completely priced out of that high-end, polished studio sound, so they hunted down cheap secondhand equipment that the traditional rock and pop world had basically thrown away.
One man's trash, right?
Literally. The Roland TR-808 drum machine is the perfect example of this. When it first came out in the early 80s, it was a massive commercial failure.
Really? A failure?
Oh, yeah, because it didn't sound like a real acoustic drum kit. It sounded artificial. Rock bands absolutely hated it.
That's hilarious, considering what it became. That artificial, booming, futuristic sound is exactly what made it legendary for dance and hip-hop later on.
Yep.
They even named their group after it, 808 State. which is so bold. It's like naming your rock band the Fender Stratocasters. They were loudly broadcasting what their entire identity was built on from day one.
They were, yeah. But, the machines alone don't fully explain the mutation of the sound. The critical pivot is who was actually programming them.
Okay, who is that that controls?
Well, you had members like Graham Massey, who brought this profound, deeply technical knowledge of jazz, funk, and avant-garde experimental music to the
Oh,
table.
wow, jazz in a techno group.
Yeah, and you also had Gerald Simpson, who later became a titan in his own right as a guy called Gerald. They were feeding these highly complex human musical theories into these rigid, repetitive machines.
Okay, that makes so much sense. That's where we get this incredible sonic contrast. Because the source text describes Detroit and Chicago techno as sometimes feeling cold or crisp or purely mechanical. But 808 State injected this uniquely UK cloudy or humid atmosphere into the mix.
Humid captures the frequency perfectly, actually. They took those mechanical beats that driving repetitive pulse, and they just layered them with intricate jazz samples, warm funk bass lines, and swirling experimental textures.
They warmed it up.
They did. They gave cold electronic grooves a distinctly human temperature. It literally sounded like a damp, foggy, industrial English city waking up to something totally new.
I love that imagery.
Yeah, they took this pristine, aggressive American blueprint and essentially just dragged it through the Manchester weather.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because having established this totally unique, humid UK sound, the next major hurdle is how they actually packaged it to the world.
Right.
They didn't just put out standard club singles like everyone else was doing. They radically altered the format of how dance music was consumed.
They completely flipped the script.
Yeah. So in 1988, they released an album called New Build. And the article points out it wasn't this massive pop hit right out of the gate, but it was a total revolution in structure. Let me put it this way for you listening. Up until then, dance tracks were like quick shots of adrenaline. A DJ plays a 3-minute burst for the dance floor, you sweat, you dance, and then they mix in the next track.
Yep. Get in, get out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But New Build was like turning those quick bursts into a 2-hour atmospheric sci-fi film.
The format dictates the function, honestly. Before New Build, dance music was largely treated as disposable utility. Basically, yeah. It was pressed on 12-inch vinyl singles, specifically for DJs to deploy at 2 a.m. to get people moving. It was functional music engineered solely for physical movement. You didn't just sit in your living room and actively listen to a functional club tool,
Right, you'd just be sitting on your couch staring at the wall while a kick drum hammered away for 3 minutes. It'd be weird.
Exactly. Which is why New Build was such a paradigm shift. They took the standard Chicago 4-on-the-floor beat, which, if you don't know, is just that relentless kick drum hitting on every single beat, the universal heartbeat of a club.
Boom, 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 boom.
Right, and they stretched it out. They introduced long-form compositional structures. They brought in vast, cavernous ambient spaces and really intricate, moody jazz sampling. They proved that club music could be an actual album experience. It demanded deep listening.
Meaning you could actually put on headphones at home and just get lost in the architecture of the sound rather than just consuming it over a weekend bender.
Exactly. And the historical weight of that shift really cannot be overstated. By proving that techno could be an album-length cerebral journey, New Build laid the direct groundwork for what would eventually become known as IDM intelligent dance music and ambient techno.
Wow, that's huge.
It birthed the entire culture that would later define legendary labels like Warp Records. We are talking about the foundation for absolute legends of electronic music like Aphex Twin, Autechre, and Boards of Canada.
There's a crazy lineage.
It really is. That entire movement of UK electronic intellectualism traces its roots directly back to 808 State, basically demanding that you actually sit down and listen.
Which sounds totally normal to us now, right? But it was a deeply radical proposition in 1988. But I think this brings up a massive tension in their story.
Oh.
Yeah, because we are talking about long-form, avant-garde, cerebral listening experiences. How does a weird, experimental underground group manage to actually cross over into the mainstream? That usually doesn't happen.
It requires a Trojan horse, basically. You have to balance your uncompromising artistic vision with a sonic palette that doesn't completely terrify the general public.
Here's where it gets really interesting. In 1989, they released a track called Pacific State. And the imagery the source uses to describe this song is incredibly vivid. Again, standard acid house at this time was an aggressive attack on the senses, strictly meant for dark, sweaty raves.
Yeah, pure adrenaline.
But Pacific State went in the complete opposite direction. It featured actual field recordings of bird sounds.
Literally birds chirping.
Yeah. It had this incredibly soothing, breezy saxophone phrase just weaving through the whole track, layered over these smooth floating chords. It didn't feel like the chaotic peak of a party at 3 a.m. It felt like stepping outside into a peaceful city sunrise.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Pacific State completely shattered the ceiling for them. Because it was so atmospheric, so unexpectedly lush and relaxing, it actually infiltrated the UK pop charts.
Which is mind-blowing.
It really is. It demonstrated to the general public, the people who would never dare step foot inside a grimy club like the Haçienda, that techno wasn't just aggressive, mindless noise. It could possess melody, complex emotion, and a really profound sense of calm.
So it basically gave the average radio listener permission to enjoy electronic music.
Yeah.
It wasn't just for this dangerous underground subculture anymore.
Exactly. And that massive mainstream breakthrough is what really propelled their next major project, the 1990 album simply titled 90.
Right.
That record, which featured huge tracks like Cubic and Encodia, is widely studied today as a masterclass in tension. They somehow managed to maintain their high-level, complex underground experimentation, but they wrapped it in this glossy level of pop accessibility that just completely dominated the airwaves.
And the crossover didn't even stop with just pop radio. This is the era where 808 State basically becomes the electronic pillar of the Manchester movement.
Manchester. It was an unbelievable cultural collision. The rigid, almost tribal barriers between musical genres just completely dissolved in Manchester at that time.
Everyone was mingling.
Yeah. You suddenly had indie rock kids who previously only cared about guitars and traditional bands sharing the exact same cultural space and dance floors as the rave kids. 808 State achieved something incredibly rare there. They actively blurred the lines between rock and dance music.
Which was unheard of.
Totally. They gained genuine respect and acceptance from rock fans and legendary guitar bands like the Stone Roses and Happy Mondays.
Because historically, rock fans and dance music fans were like oil and water. There was a lot of hostility there. Disco sucks and all
A
that.
massive hostility.
But 808 State built a bridge. Their music had enough grit, enough texture, and enough swagger that a kid wearing a baggy Stone Roses t-shirt could hear a track like Cubic and genuinely connect with it.
Yeah, and that respect was earned not just through their studio recordings, but crucially through how they physically presented themselves to these rock fans. They refused to just hide away in a dark studio. They stepped out onto the stage as a real band, facing the audience head-on.
Which introduces a whole new set of massive logistical problems, honestly. If you have these crossover hits, and your fan base now includes highly skeptical rock and roll fans who are used to watching, guitarists physically shredding on stage, how do you present complex, studio-produced electronic music on a live stage without it being a total bore?
It's the ultimate challenge.
I have to play the skeptic for a second.
Yeah.
Because when you hear about electronic acts from the 80s and 90s, the stereotype is just some guys standing behind a keyboard, pressing play on a backing track, and awkwardly nodding their heads for an hour. How do they actually keep a rock crowd engaged?
Well, it was the existential crisis for early electronic acts, right? How do you make pushing buttons visually and musically compelling to a crowd? But the source text highlights how 808 State completely dismantled that stereotype. They absolutely refused to be a glorified playback device.
Wait, so if they aren't using playback, are you telling me they hauled fragile, temperamental analog studio gear like drum machines, synthesizers, sequencers completely out of the safety of the studio and onto a stage full of sweating, jumping people?
They hauled everything on stage, wires and all. It was chaotic.
Yeah.
And this actually circles right back to Graham Massey's jazz background that we mentioned earlier.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because the absolute core of jazz is improvisation, right?
Sure.
It's about reacting to the moment, letting the energy of the room dictate the direction of the music. Massey and the band brought that terrifying, totally unpredictable element of true improvisation to electronic music.
Wow.
When you saw 808 State live, you weren't watching a playback. You were watching real-time editing.
So they were essentially rebuilding the songs from scratch every single night.
Exactly that. They were manipulating samples on the fly. They were actively writing the mixing desk, pushing spatial effects to the absolute brink, tweaking synthesizers, and genuinely changing the structure of the track based on how the crowd was moving in that exact moment.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It was a high-wire act. It was live performance in the purest, most traditional sense, just fraught with the very real danger that a machine could glitch out or a cable could get pulled, and the whole thing could just completely fall apart.
But that danger is what makes it rock and roll.
Exactly.
And it also laid the exact foundation for how modern, respected live techno acts perform today. They proved that electronic music could be a dynamic performance art. And what really blows my mind is how far this specific, highly intellectual approach to dance music traveled.
Yeah, it didn't stay local.
Now, because it didn't just conquer the UK or even just Europe. The source notes that this sound found a massive, fiercely dedicated parallel audience all the way in Japan in the early 1990s.
It was a fascinating cultural alignment. In the early 90s, Japan was going through its own technological and cultural renaissance. They were experiencing a massive emergence of techno magazine culture.
So they were already reading up on it.
Yeah, they were deep into an ambient music boom over there. And there was this incredible domestic scene emerging called Shibuya Kai, which was characterized by a very sophisticated, sample-heavy, incredibly eclectic approach to pop music.
So the Japanese audience was already primed for this. They were looking for music that was layered and demanded close attention.
808 State fit seamlessly into that ecosystem. The Japanese audience wasn't just consuming this as background party music. They were actively cultivating a culture of deeply analyzing and appreciating techno as an art form.
Like fine wine.
Pretty much. 808 State heavily influenced how Japan developed its own unique electronic music culture, reinforcing this global idea that techno was high art, worthy of serious critical discussion, rather than just, a disposable soundtrack for a nightclub.
It's an unbelievable trajectory, really. From hunting down discarded drum machines and bargain bins in a Manchester record shop to cracking the pop charts alongside the Stone Roses, all the way to being analyzed in the music magazines of Shibuya.
It's wild.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at the whole picture, we are talking about a group that formed in 1987, and yet the source explicitly notes they were still releasing completely relevant, forward-thinking albums like Transmission Suite, as recently as 2019.
Over 30 years later.
Yeah, that kind of longevity is almost non-existent in dance music. And the ultimate takeaway here for you listening is that 808 State never treated techno as a passing fad or a cheap gimmick. They treated it as a legitimate, constantly evolving culture. They took the raw, aggressive materials of American acid house and vastly expanded the boundaries of what electronic music could be, emotionally, structurally, and culturally.
They proved definitively that machines could possess soul. Which actually brings up something that's been lingering in my mind as we've walked through their whole evolution.
Oh.
Yeah, this raises an important question, something we haven't touched on directly yet, but it's deeply rooted in the source material's breakdown of their sound design.
Ooh, all right. Where are we going with this?
Well, the article makes a very deliberate point to mention that 808 State's signature sound relied heavily on the natural instability of their analog gear.
The imperfections.
Exactly. The synthesizers would literally drift out of tune as they heated up. The drum machines weren't perfectly precise. Their music prioritized deep reverb, blank space, and breathing room over sheer, relentless sound pressure. It created a very organic, almost fragile feel to the music.
Right.
Now, compare that to the dominant sound of today. We live in a digital recording world where every single frequency can be perfectly maxed out on a laptop. Every tiny human timing error is quantized, meaning the computer just snaps every single beat perfectly onto a digital grid.
It's mathematically flawless.
Right. Every mistake is instantly erased with the click of a mouse. So the question is, are we engineering the air and the human instability completely out of our music?
That's a haunting thought, actually. Because by making everything sonically perfect, we might actually be making it sterile.
The pursuit of perfection often strips away character. Maybe the secret to creating something that still sounds like the future, even 30 years after it was recorded, is actually leaving room for imperfection. The machine needs the ghost.
The machine needs the ghost. That is a phenomenal point to leave you with today. Because maybe the best cultural translations, the ones that actually survive the test of time, are the ones that are a little bit flawed, a little bit human. So the next time you get a recipe from afar or a blueprint from across the ocean, remember 808 State. Don't just replicate the franchise burger. Leave room for a little mutation.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the perfect information around you, embrace the blank spaces, and we'll catch you next time.